The HOA president stood on my dock, clipboard in hand, demanding I tear it down within 48 hours, completely unaware that I legally owned every drop of water she was staring at. Picture this. It's 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'm sipping coffee on the dock I built with my own hands, watching morning mist rise off the lake like gentle smoke. The wood creaks beneath my feet. Solid, honest engineering that survived 2 brutal winters. Then I hear it, the sharp crack of designer heels on my planks. Brenda Thornfield storms toward me like she owns the world. "This eyesore is ruining our property values," she snaps, waving papers in my face. 48 hours to remove it, or we're taking your house." The coffee tastes bitter now. The pine-scented air feels colder. This dock was the last project my late wife Sarah and I planned together before cancer took her. "Ma'am," I say quietly, "you might want to check those property lines again." Little did she know, I didn't just own the dock, I owned the entire lake system. What would you do if some HOA Karen tried to steal your dead wife's final dream? Drop your wildest HOA nightmare below. Where are you watching from? Please tell me your area isn't this insane. Let me back up and tell you how a grieving widower ended up owning more water than SeaWorld. My name's Garrett Morrison, and 2 years ago I thought I was buying a quiet retirement spot to heal my broken heart. Instead, I bought myself a war with the neighborhood, Karen. I'm 58, recently retired after 30 years designing bridges that don't fall down and water systems that actually work. 3 years ago, cancer stole my wife Sarah, 32 years of marriage, gone in 18 brutal months. We'd planned this lakefront dream house together, sketching dock designs while she was between chemo treatments. She made me promise to build it, even if she wasn't there to see it. "You're too stubborn to let some lake beat you," she'd whispered during our last good week together. So I kept that promise and moved to Millbrook Lake Estates. Picture-perfect community, 47 homes around a pristine 200-acre lake. Property values 400 to 800 grand. Doctors, small business owners, retired teachers. The kind of place where neighbors actually wave instead of calling code enforcement. The dock project saved my sanity. 6 months of precise engineering, every permit filed correctly, every bolt torqued to specification. The county inspector called it art disguised as infrastructure. Sarah would have loved the sunrise view from those hand-shaped cedar planks, smooth as silk under bare feet. Then the Thornfield invasion began. Brenda Thornfield, imagine if a real estate headshot came to life and decided to run your neighborhood. 52 years old, blonde highlights that cost more than my monthly groceries, and the kind of community leader smile that makes smart people hide their wallets. She bought the biggest house on the lake 3 years ago, a colonial monstrosity that screams, "My kitchen cost more than your car." Her husband Rick runs Thornfield Construction, specializing in overpriced mediocrity. Together, they're like a 2-person gentrification army. Within 8 months, Brenda had sweet-talked her way into the HOA presidency. The previous board, mostly 70-somethings who believed adults could manage their own property, resigned rather than deal with her vision for community excellence. Her first crusade? Waterfront structure standardization for optimal property values. Translation: everyone's dock must look identical and be built by guess whose construction company. I pulled out my permits, my engineering reports, my county approvals, everything legitimate, professional, legal. Brenda examined them like they were written in crayon. "Permits don't supersede community standards, Mr. Morrison," she announced, standing in my driveway with her clipboard of doom. The morning sun caught her oversized diamond ring as she gestured dismissively. "This industrial eyesore damages our aesthetic harmony." Industrial eyesore? My dock was handcrafted cedar with brass fittings following the shoreline's natural curves like it grew there. But apparently, Brenda preferred Rick's floating plastic platforms. 3 times the cost, half the craftsmanship, and coincidentally, half the neighborhood already had them. The violation notice fluttered in the lake breeze, carrying the scent of her department store perfume mixed with diesel exhaust from Rick's compensating for something pickup truck. $500 per day if I didn't demolish the non-compliant structure within 72 hours. Plus, they'd file a lien against my house. "Emergency community protection powers," she declared with the authority of someone who'd watched too many cop shows. I stood there, gravel crunching under my work boots, watching this woman threaten to destroy the last thing connecting me to my wife's memory. The dock where I talked to Sarah's ghost every morning, where I scattered some of her ashes on our anniversary. "Ma'am," I said quietly, "you might want to double-check your authority on that." That evening I sat on my supposedly illegal dock, listening to water lap against the posts like gentle applause. A loon called across the lake, that wild, lonely sound that cuts straight through suburban nonsense. I thought about Sarah's favorite saying, "When bullies pick on engineers, they usually regret it." Time to visit the county records office and see exactly what I'd inherited. The next morning, I drove to the county assessor's office with my coffee still steaming and my engineer's brain in full detective mode. You know what I learned from 30 years of building things? When someone claims you can't do something, check the blueprints first, argue later. Dolores Martinez has worked that records desk since Reagan was president. She's the kind of person who remembers every weird property case, every boundary dispute, every, wait, who actually owns what? Drama. When I explained Brenda's dock ultimatum, her weathered face lit up like Christmas morning. "Riparian rights," she whispered, pulling out her magnifying glass. "Haven't seen that language in a dog's age." Now, back in engineering school, we had this professor who drilled one thing into our heads. Water rights are the Wild West of property law. Most folks think if you buy lakefront property, you own to the water's edge, and that's it. But some old deeds include something called riparian rights. Basically, you don't just own the land, you own the right to use the actual water for docks, boats, swimming, whatever. I remembered thinking it sounded too good to be true. Turns out, my deed had those magic words, including riparian rights to the high water mark. "This is interesting," Dolores said, adjusting her thick glasses. "Mind if I dig deeper? I do love a good mystery." 20 minutes later, she emerged from the back room looking like she'd struck oil, the musty smell of century-old documents wafted from the manila folders in her arms. "Mr. Morrison," she said, spreading papers across the counter, "your property has some very unusual history. Here's where things got absolutely wild. I didn't just inherit a house from some distant relative. I inherited water rights dating back to 1923, when my great-uncle Theodore Morrison, a name I vaguely remembered from family reunions, convinced the county to let him build a dam across the natural creek. Theodore was a flood control engineer who sold the county on creating this lake to prevent downstream flooding while giving locals a nice place to fish. Smart guy, that Theodore. He retained perpetual water management authority in the original agreement. I drove home in a complete daze, gravel crunching under my tires as my brain tried to process this bombshell. Brenda wasn't just wrong about my dock, she had absolutely zero legal authority over anything I did with the water. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a boat propeller. That evening, I attended Brenda's emergency board meeting. The community center reeked of industrial carpet cleaner and burnt coffee from a pot that probably hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. About 15 neighbors showed up, most looking like they'd rather be getting root canals. Brenda had prepared a full PowerPoint presentation, protecting our investment, the dock crisis. She'd even dragged along her brother-in-law, some lawyer in a $1,000 suit who kept checking his Rolex like he was billing by the minute. "This non-compliant structure threatens our property values," Brenda declared, clicking through slides comparing my beautifully crafted dock to photos of rusty, collapsing piers from God knows where. "We must act decisively to preserve community standards." The lawyer nodded gravely. "The HOA has clear authority under community covenants to regulate all waterfront structures." I stood up, pulled out Dolores's carefully copied documents, and calmly dropped my legal bomb. "According to these county records," I said, "my property includes water management authority dating back to when this lake was created. The HOA has no jurisdiction over my water-related activities." The room went silent except for the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps. The lawyer's confident expression melted faster than ice cream on hot asphalt. "That's impossible," Brenda sputtered, her face turning the color of a fire engine. "Those papers must be outdated. Community covenants supersede individual property rights." Margaret Morgan, a retired real estate attorney from Lakeshore Drive, cleared her throat. "Actually, riparian rights typically predate HOA formation and remain valid regardless of community agreements." You could practically hear Brenda's blood pressure spiking. "This is ridiculous. One selfish homeowner cannot hold our entire community hostage." "Ma'am," I replied, keeping my voice level, "I'm not holding anyone hostage. I'm just exercising the same property rights you'd want to protect." The meeting dissolved into whispered conversations and nervous glances. 2 board members actually apologized for the rushed enforcement timeline. But Brenda? She went full nuclear. "We're hiring a real attorney to challenge these fake documents," she announced. "This community will not be bullied by outdated technicalities." Walking to my truck afterward, Margaret Morgan appeared beside my door like a guardian angel. "Garrett," she said quietly, "I helped research this HOA's formation 15 years ago. I think there might be some serious problems with their original paperwork." Driving home under a canopy of stars, I realized this was just the beginning. 3 days later, Brenda launched her counterattack with the subtlety of a freight train through a china shop. She called an emergency community meeting for Saturday morning, complete with professionally printed flyers that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. The headline screamed, "Protecting Millbrook Lake from Legal Manipulation and Property Value Destruction." You had to admire her commitment to drama. The community center was packed tighter than a sardine can. Brenda had transformed the space into her personal courtroom, complete with a projector screen and her brother-in-law lawyer stationed at a folding table like he was conducting the Spanish Inquisition. The whole place reeked of industrial coffee and nervous tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brenda announced, clicking through slides comparing my dock to rusty eyesores from abandoned properties, "we face an unprecedented threat to our community's stability. One homeowner is using fabricated documents to circumvent legitimate HOA authority." Fabricated documents. My engineer's blood started simmering. I'd seen plenty of construction disputes over the years, but outright accusations of fraud were fighting words. Her lawyer, let's call him Mr. Expensive Suit, nodded gravely. "These alleged riparian rights are clearly outdated technicalities that have no bearing on modern community governance. The HOA has absolute authority under current covenants." That's when I realized Brenda had made a crucial mistake. She was so busy attacking my character, she'd forgotten to actually research the law. The next morning, armed with more coffee and a growing sense that Theodore had been one sneaky genius, I returned to Dolores's records desk. "I need to see everything about how this lake system was created," I told her. "Maps, contracts, engineering reports, the works." Dolores vanished into the archives like a woman on a mission. An hour later, she emerged clutching folders thick enough to use as doorstops, her eyes sparkling with the joy of a true bureaucratic detective. "Your great-uncle Theodore," she said, spreading century-old maps across the counter, "wasn't just building a dam, he was solving the county's entire flood problem." The documents painted an incredible picture. In 1923, spring flooding regularly devastated 3 townships downstream. Theodore proposed an ambitious solution: dam Millbrook Creek, create a retention lake system, and build overflow channels to manage seasonal water surges. The county was so desperate for flood control, they essentially gave him carte blanche. His original agreement granted perpetual water management rights for all tributaries and waterways within township boundaries, a deal so comprehensive it made my head spin. Theodore didn't just own the lake. He controlled every creek, stream, and drainage ditch that fed into the entire watershed system. "But wait," Dolores said with the grin of someone saving the best surprise for last. "There's more." She pulled out payment ledgers dating back decades. The county had been faithfully depositing annual water management fees into a trust account, money I never knew existed. The current balance, with accumulated interest, was $847,000. I stared at those numbers, my coffee growing cold in my hands. Brenda was threatening to fine me $500 a day for exercising rights worth nearly $1 million. That evening, Margaret Morgan arrived at my kitchen table with her legal arsenal: reading glasses, legal pads, and the predatory smile of an attorney who'd just scented blood in the water. "This is extraordinary," she murmured, studying Theodore's contracts by my kitchen lamp. "Your great-uncle essentially became a private utility company. These rights don't just supersede HOA authority, they supersede almost everything." "Margaret," I said, watching her make rapid notes, "what happens if an HOA has been operating outside their legal boundaries?" She looked up with the expression of someone who'd just solved a particularly delicious puzzle. "Well, if they've been collecting fees for water access they don't control, charging for permits they can't legally issue..." She trailed off, scribbling calculations. "We need to examine their incorporation documents immediately. If this HOA was established without properly researching existing water rights, their entire legal foundation might be built on quicksand." The next evening, I attended Brenda's follow-up community unity meeting. her attempt to rally support after the previous week's legal bombshell. This time, I came prepared. When she opened the floor for questions, I stood up with a manila folder containing Theodore's water management agreements. "Mrs. Thornfield," I said conversationally, "before we discuss dock regulations, I'm curious, did the HOA obtain water rights approval when it was incorporated 15 years ago?" The room went dead silent. Brenda's confident smile flickered like a bad light bulb. That's irrelevant," she stammered. "We're discussing current community standards." "Actually," I continued, "since the HOA has been collecting water access fees from homeowners, I assume you have documentation proving you control those water rights?" Her brother-in-law lawyer suddenly developed an intense interest in his briefcase contents. 3 board members exchanged worried glances. "This meeting isn't about your fabricated claims," Brenda snapped, her composure cracking like thin ice. "Ma'am," I replied, "these aren't fabricated. They're recorded with the county and backed by 90 years of legal precedent. Would you like to see the payment records?" Walking home under the stars, I realized Brenda had just made her second crucial mistake. She'd challenged an engineer to a documentation fight. Brenda's next move was so predictably vindictive I almost admired her commitment to being awful. 2 days after embarrassing her at the community meeting, I woke up to the apocalyptic sound of splintering wood and my neighbor Jake Morrison hammering on my front door at 6:30 a.m. Through my kitchen window, I could see what used to be my dock, now looking like it had been attacked by a very angry, very large beaver. "Garrett," Jake shouted, still wearing his bathrobe and slippers, "you gotta see this disaster." Rick Thornfield's boat bobbed innocently about 50 yards offshore, engine puttering like a contented cat. Rick himself stood at the helm wearing an expression that screamed, "Who, me?" louder than a car alarm. The corner of my dock, the exact spot where Sarah and I had planned to install a memorial bench, lay in pieces like broken dreams. "Mechanical failure," Rick hollered across the water, gesturing helplessly at his perfectly functional motor. "Throttle got stuck in forward. Real sorry about the damage. I'll help you clean up." "Sure, Rick, and I suppose the Easter Bunny's been using your boat for weekend joyrides." I walked down to survey the carnage, my bare feet finding every sharp splinter like a sadistic game of hopscotch. The smell hit me immediately, diesel fuel mixing with lake water and 30 years of engineering pride reduced to floating debris. Of all the spots Rick could have accidentally hit, he'd managed to destroy the one corner that meant the most to me. In engineering school, they teach you to recognize patterns. When someone threatens your property on Monday and accidentally destroys it on Wednesday, that's not mechanical failure. That's felony stupidity. But here's the beautiful thing about being an engineer. We document everything. While Rick was probably high-fiving Brenda over their brilliant sabotage plan, I was calmly installing security cameras and calling in favors from 30 years of professional relationships. That afternoon, as I rebuilt the damaged section with lumber that smelled like fresh determination, Margaret called with news that made Rick's little boat stunt seem like a parking ticket. "I've been excavating the HOA's incorporation documents," she said, her voice crackling with the excitement of a lawyer who'd found legal gold. "Garrett, they never filed proper water rights research when they formed. State law requires any waterfront HOA to document existing riparian rights before claiming regulatory authority." I stopped mid-swing, my hammer frozen above a half-driven nail. English translation? This HOA has been operating illegally for 15 years. Every fee they've collected, every fine they've issued, every waterfront regulation they've enforced, it's all legally void. They're like a restaurant operating without a health license, except instead of serving bad food, they've been serving bad legal advice. While Margaret explained the finer points of HOA law, I noticed familiar engine noise approaching. Rick's boat was making another reconnaissance pass, this time carrying Brenda like Cleopatra on her barge. They cruised close enough that I could smell her department store perfume battling Rick's exhaust fumes for olfactory dominance. "Dock's looking good, Morrison," Rick called with the fake enthusiasm of a used car salesman. "Real shame about that mechanical problem. These old engines, just can't trust them, you know?" Brenda sat beside him like a fashion mannequin, her designer sunglasses reflecting the afternoon sun, while she studied my repair work with the intensity of a military strategist planning the next assault. That evening, my insurance company called. Rick had already filed his incident report, a masterpiece of creative writing detailing his heroic efforts to avoid collision despite catastrophic throttle malfunction. His story was so thoroughly rehearsed it belonged in community theater. But Rick and Brenda had made one fatal error. They'd assumed they were dealing with some confused widower who'd crumble under pressure. Clearly, nobody had mentioned that pissing off an engineer is like poking a sleeping dragon with a very sharp stick. Thursday evening, I made strategic phone calls. First, to Tom Rodriguez, a marine mechanic who owed me a favor from a bridge inspection project. Second, to Detective Collins from County Water Patrol. Third, to Patricia Valdez, the water rights attorney who specialized in making HOA bullies cry. Maritime sabotage? Patricia laughed when I described the situation. That's a new one for my resume. But if you can prove intentional damage to property protected by federal water rights, we're talking serious criminal charges. Friday morning brought my personal Justice League, the insurance adjuster, Detective Collins, Tom with his toolbox, and enough documentation to choke a bureaucrat. While they examined the wreckage, I provided the security footage that would make Rick very unhappy. Tom's mechanical diagnosis was poetry in motion. This throttle's been deliberately modified, he announced, pointing to fresh tool marks. Someone rigged this baby to stick in forward gear. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was premeditated maritime stupidity. Detective Collins made careful notes while photographing everything. Mr. Morrison, based on this evidence, we'll be filing charges for criminal mischief, insurance fraud, and destruction of historically protected property. That afternoon, Rick received a surprise visit from county deputies with handcuffs and very serious expressions. By sunset, the neighborhood was buzzing like a stirred beehive, and Brenda had discovered that being married to a felon wasn't part of her community leadership vision. That weekend, while Rick was discovering that orange jumpsuits don't match his complexion, Margaret and I transformed my kitchen table into mission control for the most shocking family secret since someone discovered their grandfather was a bootlegger. "Sweet Jesus on a bicycle," Margaret whispered, her reading glasses nearly sliding off her nose as she opened a folder marked Morrison Water Trust, Confidential County Records. The papers inside smelled like old libraries and forgotten power, that musty scent of documents that have been quietly changing the world while everyone else was watching TV. What we found didn't just change my situation, it rewrote the rules of the entire game. Theodore Morrison, my eccentric great-uncle who I'd barely remembered from childhood family reunions, hadn't just built a nice little lake for fishing. He'd engineered himself into becoming the unofficial water king of half the county. The original 1923 agreement was a masterpiece of legal foresight. When the county begged Theodore to solve their devastating flood problem, he didn't just build one dam, he created an integrated water management system covering 3 townships. In exchange, they granted him exclusive authority over all water distribution within county watershed boundaries. Translation: I didn't just own the lake. I owned the water supply for 15,000 people. "Look at this payment ledger," Margaret said, her voice cracking with disbelief. She spread out decades of financial records like she was revealing buried treasure. "The county's been depositing annual water management fees into a trust account since 1950. Current balance." She paused for dramatic effect, then slid the bank statement across the table. $847,000, plus 70 years of compound interest. I nearly choked on my coffee. "Nobody told me about this money?" "Classic bureaucratic shell game," Margaret explained. "The county sent reports to Theodore's estate lawyers, assuming someone was managing the trust. The lawyers filed everything properly, assuming the county was handling day-to-day operations. Everyone did their job, but nobody connected the dots when Theodore died. But the real nuclear bomb was buried in Millbrook Lake Estate's development paperwork from 2009. The builders had apparently assumed the lake was standard county-managed public water. They'd never researched existing water rights, never consulted historical agreements, never discovered that their entire waterfront development was built on someone else's liquid property. "This HOA," Margaret said, tapping her pen against the evidence pile, "has been operating like they own water rights they never actually possessed. Every dock permit, every boat regulation, every water access fee they've collected, it's all legally meaningless. The scope of my inherited authority was breathtaking. Complete control over Millbrook Lake and its tributary network. Regulatory power over 3 major creeks serving neighboring developments, environmental oversight for the county's eastern stormwater system, authority over 2 municipal water intake points, final approval rights for any construction affecting watershed areas, I owned more water authority than some small cities. But here's the truly delicious irony, Margaret continued, pulling out the HOA's insurance policies. If they've been operating without legal water rights authorization, their insurance coverage could be completely void. All those overpriced construction contracts Rick pushed through, the community could demand full restitution. My engineering brain started calculating the cascading implications. Brenda hadn't just been illegally harassing me. She'd been running a fraudulent organization that had collected hundreds of thousands in fees for services they couldn't legally provide. "Margaret," I said, staring at documents that essentially made me a private utility company, "what if I decided to exercise these rights fully?" Her eyes lit up with the predatory gleam of an attorney who'd just spotted the legal equivalent of a winning lottery ticket. "Well, you could shut down boat traffic, regulate water levels, halt any waterfront construction, control environmental impact assessments, and oversee municipal water operations. In other words, I could turn off half the county's water infrastructure before breakfast. But with great power comes the terrifying realization that you're now responsible for not screwing up thousands of people's lives." The question wasn't whether I could destroy Brenda's little HOA kingdom, it was whether I was wise enough to use this power responsibly. Monday morning, I did what any rational person does when they accidentally inherit enough water rights to hold a county hostage. I assembled the legal equivalent of the Avengers. First call went to Patricia Valdez, the water rights attorney Margaret had recommended. Patricia showed up at my door Tuesday afternoon looking like she could negotiate peace treaties before lunch and still have time to destroy a corrupt city council by dinner. She drove a Tesla that whispered expensive competence and carried a briefcase that probably cost more than Rick's boat. "Mr. Morrison," she said, settling into my kitchen while speed-reading Theodore's documents like she was cramming for the bar exam. "In 30 years of practicing water law, I've never seen private rights this bulletproof. You don't just own water, you own the plumbing for half the county." Next came Dr. Lisa Morgan, an environmental engineer who specialized in watershed management and spoke the same language as my engineering brain. She arrived with enough scientific equipment to stock a small NASA mission, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from actually knowing what you're talking about. "This is phenomenal," she said, studying Theodore's system maps while her laptop displayed real-time environmental data. "Your great-uncle built a flood prevention network that's still saving millions in property damage every spring. This isn't just about beating an HOA, this is about protecting an entire ecosystem." Margaret brought her legal warfare expertise and a contact list that read like a directory of people who make municipal officials nervous. Jake volunteered his construction knowledge and served as our inside man in HOA politics, plus he made coffee strong enough to wake Theodore's ghost. But our secret weapon was Dolores, who'd been quietly watching this administrative train wreck from the county records office for 15 years. "Sweetie," she said, spreading documents across my table like a dealer in the world's most boring casino, "I've been waiting for someone to expose this HOA's little water rights fantasy. They've been collecting fees for authority they never possessed, and honey, that's called fraud where I come from." Our first war council session felt like planning a heist, if heists involved massive amounts of paperwork and environmental law instead of explosives and getaway cars. The aroma of Jake's industrial-strength coffee mixed with the vanilla scent of century-old documents while we plotted Brenda's legal downfall. Patricia laid out our nuclear options. "Your water rights don't just supersede HOA authority. They supersede almost everything. Federal environmental law, state utility regulations, municipal ordinances, they all bow to historical water management agreements. Here's something they don't teach in homeowners' guides. When you inherit property with historical utility rights, you also inherit what lawyers lovingly call successor liability. Basically, you become responsible for maintaining infrastructure that entire communities depend on. It's like inheriting your grandfather's house and discovering the basement contains the city's main electrical grid." Dr. Morgan's environmental assessment delivered both good and terrifying news. Theodore's engineering is still sound, but the dam system needs $2.3 million in upgrades within 5 years. The county's budgeted $400,000, completely unaware they don't actually control the infrastructure. The beautiful irony? My trust fund, fattened by decades of county payments, could cover most of those repairs. Jake's insider intelligence proved invaluable. Brenda's been running Rick's construction deals like her personal ATM. No competitive bidding, no board oversight, no quality inspections. The community center's electrical system is held together with hope and electrical tape. We documented systematic financial abuse, unauthorized contracts, inflated prices, and fee collections for services the HOA couldn't legally provide. Rick had been billing premium prices for bargain basement work while Brenda provided political cover. Margaret uncovered the most outrageous scam, homeowners paying water access fees at closing that went straight into HOA accounts. Families had shelled out thousands for dock rights that were legally meaningless, like paying admission to a museum you already own. But here's where our strategy got deliciously clever. Instead of using my water rights like a legal sledgehammer, we'd offer to solve the problems Brenda's incompetence had created. "This is beautiful," Patricia explained, outlining our approach. "You hold enough power to shut down their entire operation, but you're choosing diplomacy first. That makes you the responsible adult and Brenda the petty tyrant in any public narrative." Our three-phase plan was elegant. First, establish my legal authority publicly and officially. Second, offer collaborative solutions that benefit everyone. Third, let Brenda's own reaction expose her true character when faced with someone who couldn't be bullied. Dr. Morgan would conduct a comprehensive watershed health assessment, documenting how proper management could improve everyone's property values and environmental quality. Margaret would organize community education sessions about real property rights versus HOA marketing fiction. Patricia would file the legal paperwork that would make my authority official and undeniable. "One prediction," Jake said with the grin of someone anticipating premium entertainment. "When Brenda realizes she's been outmaneuvered by actual legal authority, the meltdown's going to be spectacular. Time to teach this community the difference between legitimate leadership and bullying with a clipboard." Brenda's next move proved that desperate people with too much money make spectacularly bad decisions. Thursday morning brought a certified letter so thick it could stop small-caliber bullets, delivered by a process server who looked like he moonlighted as a bodyguard. The return address read, "Whitman, Sterling and Associates," one of those white shoe law firms where the hourly rate could finance a small country's military budget. The letter was a masterpiece of legal intimidation disguised as sophisticated language. They accused me of systematic document fabrication, conspiracy to defraud community assets, and, my personal favorite, exploiting grief-induced psychological instability to circumvent legitimate governance structures. Apparently, losing Sarah had scrambled my brain so badly that I couldn't distinguish between real property rights and elaborate fantasies. Who knew widowhood came with automatic legal incompetence? They demanded immediate dock removal, payment of $47,000 in accumulated fines and legal fees, plus a public apology for disrupting community stability through fraudulent claims. The deadline? 72 hours, or they'd file federal fraud charges. I was still marveling at their creative legal theory when Patricia called, cackling like someone who'd just won the lottery and discovered their ex-husband had been audited on the same day. "Garrett," she wheezed between laughs, "their lead attorney just called wanting to discuss reasonable settlement terms before examining your documentation." When I mentioned federal water rights and 90 years of county payments, he went silent for 30 seconds. Then he asked if we'd accept a nuisance settlement to avoid costly litigation. But Brenda was just warming up her publicity campaign. That afternoon, she launched a social media assault that would have impressed a political dirty tricks operative. Facebook rants, neighborhood app manifestos, even a professionally produced YouTube video filmed in her kitchen with lighting that probably cost more than my truck. "Fellow residents," she announced to her phone camera with the practiced sincerity of a telemarketer, "we face an unprecedented threat from someone exploiting personal tragedy to steal community assets. This man is clearly struggling with grief-related mental health issues, and we must protect ourselves from those who would manipulate our compassion." Jake forwarded me screenshots from the neighborhood Facebook group where Brenda's supporters were crafting increasingly creative conspiracy theories. Someone suggested I might be part of an organized crime syndicate specializing in HOA hostile takeovers. Another theorized that Patricia was my romantic partner and we were running an elaborate insurance scam. The entertainment value was priceless, but Brenda had made a fatal error. She'd forgotten that some neighbors actually possessed functioning brain cells. Margaret's quiet property rights education sessions had been building underground momentum like a subway system. Her coffee meetings had evolved into standing-room-only gatherings as homeowners discovered exactly how little legal authority HOAs actually wield versus how much they pretend to have. Here came the mini twist that changed everything. "Doctor, Morgan's official watershed assessment arrived with the full bureaucratic weight of County Engineering Department letterhead. Her report documented that Theodore's flood control system had prevented an estimated $47 million in downstream damage over 9 decades, and that my great-uncle's engineering was still protecting thousands of homes every spring. The county engineer's office, finally understanding who actually controlled their critical infrastructure, sent me an official letter recognizing my hereditary water management authority and begging for a meeting about collaborative maintenance planning. That's when Brenda made her second catastrophic mistake. She called the state environmental agency claiming I was illegally manipulating public water systems for personal gain. The environmental inspector who arrived Friday morning was Sarah Delgado, a woman who looked like she'd been personally trained by Mother Nature to destroy people who waste her time. She spent 4 hours examining Theodore's dam system, reviewing maintenance logs, and testing water quality with equipment that probably cost more than my house. Her verdict was poetry. This is the finest private water management system I've inspected in 20 years. Whoever's maintaining this infrastructure deserves recognition, not investigation. When Inspector Delgado discovered that Brenda had filed a fraudulent emergency report, her expression could have flash-frozen hell itself. "Ma'am," she informed Brenda with the deadly calm of someone explaining federal crimes, "false environmental emergency reports carry serious penalties. Our legal department will be contacting you." But Rick, apparently feeling left out of the family's legal troubles, decided to contribute his own special brand of genius. Still facing criminal charges for dock sabotage, he organized a neighborhood safety patrol to monitor my property for suspicious activities. Their surveillance operation was so professional it belonged in a comedy show, parking in my driveway to take photos, following me to the hardware store like discount private investigators, and documenting my unusual behavior of drinking coffee on my own dock. Even my mail carrier started commenting on the amateur spy network camped outside my house. But Rick's surveillance team was so busy watching me, they completely missed Patricia's process server delivering harassment restraining orders to their own front doors. By Sunday, Brenda's legal strategy was collapsing faster than Rick's construction reputation, and the final showdown was inevitable. By Monday morning, Brenda had officially graduated from neighborhood nuisance to full-blown domestic terrorist with a real estate license. Her latest stroke of genius? Filing an emergency petition claiming my dam posed imminent catastrophic risk and demanding the county seize it under eminent domain. Apparently, if she couldn't steal my water rights through HOA intimidation, she'd get the government to steal them for her. The county engineer who arrived Tuesday morning looked like he'd rather be performing surgery on live wolverines. Tom Hendricks had been managing municipal infrastructure since the Carter administration, and his expression suggested he'd received the kind of phone call that makes grown bureaucrats question their career choices. "Mr. Morrison," he said, examining Theodore's dam with the appreciation of someone who recognizes superior craftsmanship. "I've reviewed Mrs. Thornfield's emergency petition. She claims this 90-year-old structure is deteriorating rapidly and poses immediate flood danger to downstream communities." He paused, running his weathered hands along Theodore's flawless concrete work like he was petting a well-behaved dog. "Son, this is some of the finest flood control engineering I've seen in 4 decades. Your great-uncle built something that's still protecting thousands of homes better than most modern systems." Tom's inspection lasted 4 hours and covered every bolt, valve, and drainage channel with the thoroughness of someone whose report would determine whether Brenda faced federal charges for filing false emergency claims. His verdict was poetry wrapped in bureaucratic language. This infrastructure exceeds all current safety standards and appears to have been maintained to museum-quality specifications. But Brenda wasn't satisfied with merely wasting one government agency's time. That afternoon, she launched what I can only describe as bureaucratic carpet bombing. Simultaneous complaints to the EPA, Army Corps of Engineers, State Water Authority, County Health Department, and Department of Homeland Security, claiming I was operating illegal industrial water processing facilities that threatened regional security. The parade of federal inspectors who invaded my property that week looked like a convention of people who desperately wanted to be anywhere else on Earth. Each agency sent their most experienced investigators, expecting to find some kind of environmental Chernobyl worthy of national emergency response. Instead, they found Theodore's meticulously maintained system, complete with maintenance logs that read like love letters to proper engineering and water quality data that made municipal treatment plants look like mud puddles by comparison. The EPA inspector actually asked for my permission to use Theodore's design in her agency training materials. "This is textbook watershed management," she said, taking photos of the overflow channels. "Whoever built this understood hydrology better than most of our current contractors." But while Brenda was busy filing fraudulent reports across the entire federal government, Rick decided to contribute his own special brand of criminal creativity to the family's legal troubles. Wednesday night, my security cameras captured Rick and two of his construction cronies attempting to sabotage the dam's overflow system with bolt cutters and what appeared to be a complete absence of functioning brain cells. Their plan, as far as I could determine, was to create actual safety problems that would validate Brenda's false emergency reports. The footage was so clear it looked like a training video for how not to commit infrastructure terrorism. Rick cutting critical flood control cables while his accomplices provided lookout services with all the professional competence of drunken mall security guards. I called Detective Collins at dawn Thursday. She arrived with backup and expressions that suggested Rick's morning was about to become significantly less pleasant than he'd planned. "Mr. Morrison," she said after reviewing the security footage, "this isn't vandalism. Sabotaging flood control infrastructure during spring flood season is federal terrorism. We're talking 20 years minimum." Rick's arrest that morning drew a crowd like a neighborhood block party, except instead of barbecue grills and lawn chairs, we had handcuffs and federal charges. Even Brenda's spy network suddenly remembered urgent appointments elsewhere when the FBI terrorism task force arrived. But Brenda's response to her husband's terrorism arrest proved that some people can't recognize rock bottom even when it hits them in the face with a federal indictment. She called a press conference. Not a neighborhood meeting or HOA gathering, but an actual press conference with a makeshift podium in her driveway and printed statements that probably violated several libel laws. The morning air carried the scent of desperation mixed with expensive perfume as she faced local media and a growing crowd of neighbors who'd come for the entertainment value. "My husband is the victim of an elaborate conspiracy," she announced to cameras that were recording what would become the county's most watched YouTube video. "This Morrison character has systematically corrupted government agencies, fabricated historical documents, and orchestrated a criminal enterprise designed to steal our community's water assets." When a reporter asked for evidence of my document fabrication, Brenda's confident smile developed the stability of a house built on quicksand. "The evidence is being suppressed by corrupt federal agents who are obviously part of this conspiracy," she declared, apparently unaware that accusing FBI investigators of criminal conspiracy on live television isn't traditionally considered a winning legal strategy. That night's news featured Brenda claiming the federal government was helping me steal water while her husband sat in federal custody for terrorism. The final showdown was inevitable. The town council meeting that Thursday evening was standing room only, like a heavyweight championship fight where everyone knew the underdog was about to knock out the champion. Word had spread through 3 counties about the water rights war, and the community center was packed tighter than a rush-hour subway car. Local TV crews had set up cameras, newspaper reporters clutched notebooks like lifelines, and even a few YouTubers were streaming live to audiences who'd apparently never seen a middle-aged widow destroy an HOA president, using nothing but historical documents and basic common sense. The air buzzed with anticipation and industrial-strength coffee from the concession stand that some enterprising teenager had set up in the parking lot. You could practically taste the drama. Brenda arrived fashionably late in a black SUV that screamed, "I'm important and everyone should notice," flanked by what remained of her legal team. Basically one very nervous attorney who looked like he'd rather be defending serial killers. She'd dressed for battle in a power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, her designer heels clicking across the linoleum like a countdown timer. Rick was notably absent, having discovered that federal terrorism charges don't come with bail options. Council Chairman Robert Hayes called the emergency session to order with the weary expression of someone who'd been dragged into a soap opera when he'd signed up to discuss sewer maintenance and road repair budgets. "We're here to address the Millbrook Lake water rights dispute," he announced. "And I want everyone to know we've invited representatives from the county attorney's office, the state environmental agency, and the Federal Water Management Bureau to provide expert testimony." Brenda took the podium first, her confident smile suggesting she still believed charm and volume could overcome federal documentation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "we're here because one man's elaborate fraud scheme has disrupted our peaceful community and corrupted multiple government agencies." She launched into a PowerPoint presentation that would have impressed a conspiracy theorist, complete with charts allegedly proving that my water rights were obviously fabricated, and that the various government inspections were clearly coordinated deception. She claimed I'd somehow bribed federal agents, forged century-old documents, and manipulated the county's computerized record system. "This man," she declared, pointing at me like I was a war criminal, "has exploited his wife's tragic death to generate sympathy while systematically stealing community assets through an elaborate confidence scheme that has fooled even experienced investigators." The audience stirred uncomfortably. Bringing Sarah into this circus had just crossed a line that even Brenda's supporters recognized as unacceptable. County Attorney Michelle Rodriguez took the podium next, carrying a briefcase thick enough to use as a defensive weapon. "Mrs. Thornfield," she said in the tone reserved for explaining simple concepts to complicated people, "we've conducted a comprehensive investigation of Mr. Morrison's water rights claims. Every document has been verified through multiple sources, including federal archives, state historical records, and county engineering files dating back to 1923. She presented official findings. Theodore's water management agreements were legitimate, my inheritance was properly documented, and the county had been paying water management fees into my trust account for 70 years. The HOA had been operating without proper water rights authorization since its formation. Furthermore," Rodriguez continued, "Mrs. Thornfield has filed 14 false reports with various agencies over the past month, wasting thousands of taxpayer dollars and federal resources. Her husband is currently facing terrorism charges for attempting to sabotage critical flood control infrastructure." EPA Inspector Sarah Delgado stepped to the microphone with the authority of someone who'd spent decades separating environmental fact from fiction. "I've inspected Mr. Morrison's water management system extensively. It represents some of the finest private watershed stewardship in the region. Mrs. Thornfield's claims of environmental danger are not only false, they're deliberately fraudulent. But the real knockout punch came from Dr. Morgan, who presented her comprehensive watershed assessment with the calm precision of someone stating mathematical facts. Theodore Morrison's flood control system has prevented an estimated $47 million in downstream damage over 9 decades, she announced. Mr. Morrison's continued stewardship of this infrastructure is critical to regional flood protection. The HOA's attempts to interfere with this system have actually threatened public safety." When Chairman Hayes asked if I wanted to respond, I stood up and walked to the podium carrying a single manila folder. The room went dead silent except for the hum of TV cameras and someone's nervous cough. "Folks," I said, "I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to honor my wife's memory by maintaining a dock she helped design. But when Mrs. Thornfield decided to turn grief into a weapon and harassment into entertainment, she forced me to defend rights I never even knew I had." I opened the folder and pulled out the county's official recognition of my water management authority. This isn't about revenge or power. It's about responsibility. I inherited the obligation to protect infrastructure that keeps your home safe from flooding, and I take that seriously. The room erupted in applause that lasted so long the chairman had to call for order. Brenda sat frozen, her confident smile finally extinguished like a candle in a hurricane. 6 months later, the transformation was so complete it felt like we'd time-traveled to a dimension where HOAs actually serve communities instead of terrorizing them. Rick was serving 18 months in federal prison, learning that orange jumpsuits clash with everyone's complexion and that terrorism charges don't come with early parole for good behavior. Brenda had sold her house in a fire sale and disappeared to inflict her clipboard tyranny on some unsuspecting community 3 states away. Good riddance to both of them. The emergency HOA election 3 days after the town hall meeting felt like democracy in action. Margaret Morgan won the presidency unanimously, bringing actual legal expertise and revolutionary concepts like treating neighbors with respect to community leadership. Her first official act was a public apology to me, and a promise that harassment would never again masquerade as community standards. The Millbrook Watershed Conservation Trust became our masterpiece, proof that cooperation beats corruption every time. Using Theodore's $847,000 trust fund plus matching federal grants, we transformed aging flood control infrastructure into a state-of-the-art environmental protection system that monitoring stations across 3 counties now use as their gold standard. But the project that brings tears to my eyes every morning is the Sarah Morrison Memorial Environmental Learning Center, built on the exact spot where Rick tried to destroy our original dock. Children now learn about watershed ecology where my wife once dreamed of watching sunrises, while their parents discover that education conquers regulation every single time. Sarah would have loved seeing kids catch their first fish from the teaching pier, then release them while learning about sustainable ecosystems. Her memory lives in every child who discovers that protecting the environment isn't about rules, it's about understanding why clean water matters. The Theodore Morrison Environmental Engineering Scholarship Program provides $50,000 annually to students who might not otherwise afford college. 3 recipients have already returned as professional interns, maintaining the very system their scholarship money helped create. Theodore's quiet genius now funds the next generation of water stewards. Property values increased 23% once buyers realized they were investing in genuine environmental protection instead of HOA theater. Our community became the regional poster child for how private water rights and public benefit can work together when adults make decisions instead of bullies. National media couldn't get enough of the story. CNN featured us in their Good News Friday segment. The Wall Street Journal wrote about innovative private-public environmental partnerships. I even got invited to speak at water management conferences, though I still prefer my morning coffee routine to Hotel Continental breakfasts. The best revenge? Our annual Watershed Festival now draws over 3,000 visitors who come to see what happens when communities choose cooperation over conflict. Local businesses thrive, kids learn environmental stewardship, and property owners understand their actual rights versus what power-hungry bureaucrats pretend to control. Jake Morrison started an ethical construction company that specializes in environmentally responsible waterfront projects. His business card reads, "Quality work, fair prices, no corruption." A not-so-subtle dig at Rick's criminal enterprise. Jake's waiting list stretches 6 months because competence and honesty never go out of style. Every morning, I sit on Sarah's memorial dock, coffee steaming in the cool air while automated monitoring systems quietly protect thousands of homes from flooding. Great blue herons fish in crystal-clear water, while osprey nest in platforms we built specifically for wildlife habitat. Sometimes I tell Sarah about our unexpected journey from grief to community leadership, from harassment to healing. I think she'd be amazed that her final dream became the foundation for something neither of us could have imagined. A living example that ordinary people can defeat extraordinary bullies when armed with patience, proper research, and refusal to surrender. The lake holds more than water now. It holds proof that communities flourish when leadership serves everyone instead of personal ego, that environmental protection and property rights enhance each other, and that justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Theodore's engineering still prevents floods 90 years later. Sarah's love still inspires environmental education. And Brenda's harassment accidentally created the most effective water rights awareness campaign in state history. Here's my challenge for you. Research your property deed before accepting any HOA's claims about your rights. Share your HOA nightmare stories in the comments. Let's build a database of knowledge that helps homeowners fight back against clipboard tyranny. And don't forget to subscribe to Karen's Stories for more tales of ordinary people who refused to be bullied and ended up changing everything. Hit that notification bell. Next week's episode features a neighbor who built a fence on my property, not realizing I owned his entire driveway. The fight against petty tyrants never ends, but neither does the satisfaction of watching them face consequences.
Thanks for watching HOA Stories. If this episode made you laugh or shake your head at HOA madness, hit that like button and drop your opinion below. We post HOA Karen Chaos and Neighborhood Showdowns every week, so be sure to subscribe to catch the next unbelievable story.